Good afternoon and welcome to RealWealth Network's now nearly daily webinar. I'm Kathy Fedke, co-CEO of RealWealth Network, and I know a lot of us hoping that John Hyre has some good news for us. So welcome, John.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, and now I know we have a disclaimer page, and I'll just say it. You're an attorney, so you could probably say it better, but listen, everyone's situation is different. This is going to be a broad overview, but your situation is unique, so always run everything by your CPA, your advisor, your attorney, so that it applies to your specific situation. All right, so give us an update. And again, for me, it was like, well, of course I'm going to apply. We want to keep all of our employees, but at the same time, to me, it's just a freebie because businesses should really have, and just like real estate, you should have already had your reserves for 3, 4, 5, 6 months. But tell us, where's the money?
All right, we're going to go. So, Kathy, we talked before, and I mentioned this would probably go longer than your norm. You're still okay with that?
I am, and I think people who haven't met you yet or heard you yet will be in for a treat because you're both a lawyer and a CPA, right?
Well, an accountant anyway. I never got the CPA license. I figured the bar was enough of a license. I didn't want another one.
Okay, and a part-time stand-up comedian. So it's an incredible combination. So it should be a big treat for everybody.
Well, we'll have some fun with it. I think here's the feedback I've gotten on this presentation. This is about half the presentation I did 5 days after the law came out. So 5 days after the law came out, I did a 3-hour presentation. I spent all 5 days reading those 800 pages, and it made all my subsequent reading. Like I went and read Dostoevsky, and it seemed like an absolute relief after having read that bill. So we went through a very long version of this. I toned it down so we could keep it to like an hour and a half, but I think there are going to be a lot of things in here people did not realize are out there. So I'm going to try and not repeat what you hear by Googling, but really get into a few things that I haven't seen out there. Let me do my disclaimers really quickly. Guys, this is educational. It's not legal advice. Legal advice occurs when you give the nice lawyer little green pieces of paper summing up to about $500 an hour to discover your individual circumstances and custom apply the law to your circumstances. That's not what we're doing here. This is education. Can you go try it on your own without legal or tax advice? Sure, I don't recommend it. And if you fall flat on your face, I would laugh and say it's part of the Darwinian process, and you probably should have gotten the legal advice from someone qualified, if not me, then someone else. Also, and this is especially because I know there's a strong California and Bay Area following, guys, I'm not sensitive, I'm not politically correct. I refuse to adapt my language to your preferences. So if I don't recognize the other, 42 genders, I would say sorry, but really I'm not. So if you're a person who uses frequently the term I'm offended, this would be a wonderful time to go do something else. Otherwise, you were warned. I am one of the knuckle-dragging flyover country people and not an enlightened coastal person.
Hey, I do want to say though, this might be updated in a couple of minutes because I just got a text saying that Congress reaches deal on $450 billion package to help small businesses. So we'll see.
Okay, so the Democrats, let's see, so 250 for refunding, and the Democrats got an extra 200 billion instead of 250, so they talked them down a little bit. Yeah, I'll have to look that up. The Wall Street Journal's been pretty good about updating on that. So yeah, Google away. I'm going to make brief comments on the PPP and the EIDL. And the reason I'm not going to dwell on them is they've been covered ad nauseum online, on Facebook, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I'm guessing I would not add a lot of new stuff, but let me give you some brief comments and observations. On the PPP, that's the one that's a loan that becomes a handout. You can use it for payroll, utilities, interest payments on debt and rent. What we have seen with clients consistently, small community banks have been way faster and way more flexible. We've even heard of a few small community banks that permitted you to treat certain contractors as if they were employees, which is not the norm, right? Normally, if you don't have W-2 payroll staff, then you don't get handouts for the contractors. You only get handouts for paying your W-2 people for 2 months. But we have seen a few small community banks that were more flexible. They were way faster. I would say 90% of the checks that we saw cut in the first 2 weeks were from small banks that moved. The banking relationship matters a lot. In fact, based on some lawsuits we're seeing, perhaps a bit too much. In other words, Wells Fargo and some of the others are getting heat because they did what's really naturally human and talked to their existing clients that they wanted to make happy and did what makes them money. That'll be interesting to see where those lawsuits go. I suspect there'll be a settlement that's cheaper than litigation, but nothing actually illegal about what the banks did. Bullet point number 3 is key. You guys better pay attention to it. We just saw that Shake Shack gave back the money, or actually they probably never got the money. They just said, you know what, we changed our mind. Let me tell you why. Because Shake Shack's attorneys probably spoke to the management and said, would you like to go to jail? You're not a well-connected politician, Clinton, who can commit perjury and have nothing happen to them. You're normal, and if you commit perjury, you go to jail. Understand, guys, under PPP and EIDL, you are signing a federally guaranteed loan under penalties of perjury that I need this money, right? And we don't even know what that means. First of all, does I mean the company or does I mean me? Well, I don't know. Look at the document. Who are you signing for? The reason I didn't get the PPP or the EIDL, I'm doing better than ever. Thank God. I'm very grateful for it, right? I have an extreme amount of gratitude. But because of all the extra work we're getting on this kind of stuff, helping people with PPP loans and all that sort of thing, we're doing great, for which I'm thankful. And I didn't feel it right or frankly legal for me to go get the PPP or the EIDL, because I can't say with a straight face I need it when my revenues are actually going up. On the PPP, if you have a Schedule C or a 1099, that does count. So even if you don't have W-2 employees, if you're reporting on a Schedule C or you're receiving 1099s, you are eligible for PPP to reimburse you for your Schedule C from 2019. It'll be based on those numbers. So if you have a loss, that doesn't do you much good. And contractors normally, with the exception of a few small community banks, don't count as employees. So that was what I thought was worth saying on the PPP. On the EIDL, they've advertised it as this $10,000 grant, this $10,000 free money. That's not right. And I think people are finally getting that. It wasn't right from day one, and it should have never been advertised that way. What happens is with the EIDL, you're applying for a loan. You may also request an advance. The banks may or may not give you the advance, and the advance may or may not be $10,000. And from what we've seen, the SBA, which directly administers EIDL, has actually been pretty smart about how much advance they're giving. It's been a lot less than people thought. So a lot of people applied thinking, well, I'll just get the 10 grand of free money. It's not free money unless the bank denies the loan, right? It's an advance on a loan. You have to pay it back. They may not give you that advance. And if you reject the loan, you don't necessarily get to keep that advance. It's only if the bank, the SBA, rejects you. This has been a good one for landlords and especially Airbnbers, right? The people who are getting crushed right now are the Airbnb people. The landlords seem to be doing okay, and we're going to talk about why in a minute. So there's my comments on EIDL. So I'm going to get into everything else. First thing I want you all to understand, because I know there are a lot of landlords in the group, unemployment benefits have become ridiculously generous. They have become ridiculously generous. It's good and it's bad. I think it's important to get money into people's pockets. I think it's important that they can pay their bills. I think it's important that they don't panic. And I would say that the unemployment system, a little bit belatedly, will succeed in that goal. And that's a good thing. Now, I also think they've overdone it because they're giving people an incentive to not work. A lot of people are going to make far more on unemployment for quite a while than they ever made on your own. By the way, this was pointed out by 3 Republican senators, and Bernie and crowd said, no, we like people getting handouts for not working. In fact, we'd like this to be a more permanent thing. And that is not me being facetious. You can Google it and tell me I'm a liar if you think I'm mistaken. I'm not. But the good news is, anybody that you've got who works, whether an employee or a contractor, so this is new. Normally for unemployment, the benefits were, I would say, not very generous, and only in most states would apply to full-time employees who were laid off in a certain fashion. Well, that's been greatly expanded. So contractors, for example, Uber drivers or a roofer, now qualify for unemployment nationwide. Part-time workers qualify for unemployment nationwide. In fact, if you're a contractor, you were getting a 1099 and you apply for unemployment, here's what you get. You get the state average for that state divided by 50%, which for most states is going to put you at right around $250 a week, plus $600 a week from the feds. That's plus $600 a week from the feds. So you should be seeing people on unemployment getting right around $800 or so a week. Now, outside of California, that's a lot of money. So your tenants who work, help is on the way. Now the state systems are slow to catch up, right? This is a very new law. Some of the state systems, they were advertising for people who understood COBOL, right? I think COBOL is probably older than I am. So a lot of these systems, let us put it politely and say, have been very slow to implement, but it is retroactive. So what's my point? You can look at the specific bullet points. People who did not normally qualify for unemployment, part-timers and contractors, are going to, and the amounts they're getting are extremely generous. 800 a week being fairly normal, maybe even a little bit light. So if somebody had a job and doesn't have a job, I think they're going to be okay. What would I do as a landlord? I would get a forbearance agreement in place. I want to show that I'm willing to work with them, and I want to show it in writing so that I don't get accused by some communist judge of being a heartless, evil SOB. So I want to get an agreement in place that says, look, you're going to get unemployment. I might even be proactive and help them. A lot of my tenants would not be very good at applying for unemployment or at dealing with bureaucracy in general. So it's in your interest to help them out or find someone who can help them apply. Here's a hint for these state systems that are now functioning. You're more likely to get success if you apply late at night when the system's not overloaded, say 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. You're probably more likely to be able to get into the system. I would have an agreement drafted by a tenant landlord attorney saying, look, we're forbearing on rent. We're not even going to hit you with late fees, but we do expect to be paid from your unemployment, and you're going to get a very large retroactive check the first time around. We expect to get a chunk of that check for our retroactive rents. Get that in writing where it says, we agree, you agree, Mr. Tenant, you agree that we can evict you with no further action. And in most states, that's legal. You got to talk to your local lawyers for that. You agree that we can evict you with no further action if you don't honor your agreement. In other words, you're going to have money, and once you've got money, you're going to pay us. Now, you got to think about what you do if for some reason the unemployment falls through, but it really shouldn't if you're stubborn enough or they're stubborn enough to do what it takes to get it. So the point being, unemployment, ridiculously generous, and we're already seeing labor market distortion. People don't want to work. Why should they? If you're an Uber driver who was working 20 hours a week and you go home and make, oh, I don't know, 800 bucks a week, why on earth would you go back to drive Uber? So when things open back up, expect to see labor shortages based on the unintended consequences that, well, by some people were actually quite intentional, but by and large, unintended consequences of this legislation. Point being, there is money out there. So are the people on this call likely to go for unemployment? Yeah, probably some of you, so now you know. But more to the point, your tenants can go for unemployment. Loans from qualified retirement plans, and I mean non-IRA plans. So we're talking 401ks and those types of pension plans, the plans that you're normally allowed to borrow from. The borrowing limits have been increased. So if you need money, now let's talk about that. Just because you can take money out of your 401k or your IRA, should you? Well, my theory is this. I like money in a tax-free environment. I do an awful lot of investing in rental property and other types of investments through my IRAs, through my 401ks. They're all Roth, so it's tax-free, and that's why I'm interested. I don't normally, excuse me, I don't normally like to take money out of the tax-free world inside of an IRA or inside of a 401k, especially a Roth, and bring it into the taxable world. That makes me sad. That's contrary to what I'm about. However, I can think of two circumstances where it makes sense to do that. A, you really need the money. It's truly an emergency. You're sucking wind. You need the cash. Okay. Second, if there's an investment that I could not do in my IRA or 401k because of the rules that are unique to those accounts. To give you a very simple example, if my mother were willing to sell me a property at a great price, and trust me, she's not, but if she were willing to do that, my IRA and 401k are not allowed to do business with my mother. She's considered a disqualified person. So I would have to, in order to do this wonderful deal, pull the money out of the plan and do it with her directly. So what are the lending limits? Normally the lending limits in these 401ks and qualified plans, for the ones that permit them, not all of them permit them, right? The law says, here's how much you can borrow, but your plan document has to permit the borrowing. Not all plan documents do. If your 401k is self-directed, the plan doc probably permits it, and it's probably a pretty easy doc to change. On the other hand, your 401k at work, at your W-2 job, Lord only knows if they're going to change it. They're generally not so flexible. Normally, you can borrow 50 grand or 50% of your account balance, whichever's less. So 50 grand or 50% of your account balance, whichever's less. The law has changed. If you are a qualified individual, and we're going to talk about who's a qualified individual here on the next slide. If you're a qualified individual and the plan document is changed to permit it, that's key, then you are allowed to borrow 100 grand or 100% of the assets of the account, whichever is less. So they're increasing the borrowing limit so that you can pull more money out. The payments are still due within 5 years. You are allowed to have a 1-year moratorium on payments, which as a practical matter means you're going to be paying it back over 4 years instead of over 5 years if you choose to use the moratorium. So you can take 100 grand, 100% of the assets, whichever is smaller, got to pay it back in 5 years, but you can skip payments for a year, which means you have to pay it back in 4 years, and the plan doc has to allow it.